Aloha, my name is Dr. Dean Nelson, and thank you for tuning in to Planet of the Courageous. One translation of the experience of being on planet Earth in Tibetan is Planet of the Courageous. It is believed of the billions and billions of planets you might have landed on, you picked one where you have to face uncertainty, impermanence, anxiety, and of course death. It is thought you picked this planet to increase your inherent courage and to learn how to deepen your compassion and wisdom. Today I get to spend some rare time with a courageous guy who promotes peace through his work with the military and the IC community, the intelligence community. He is an expert on game theory, writing his PhD thesis at Yale about gaming. When I first heard that he was a game theorist, I thought he was really, really good at Monopoly. Well, if you've ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, you've been exposed to game theory. You hear now some diplomats saying that some move is a zero-sum game. Well, we'll let John explain all this. John and I are both from Lake Wobegon, a community in Minnesota where all the women are strong, the men good-looking, and the children are all above average. He does suffer from a bad case of Minnesota nice, and I played on that to help to get the interview with him. He uses that nice demeanor to deceive you from how drop-dead brilliant he is, as well as above average in good looks. He has an undergraduate degree and an MS in engineering science from Dartmouth and a PhD in operations and management science from Yale. He was an officer on a nuclear sub for 5 years and a special assistant to Admiral Blair, the commander of the Pacific region, from 1998 to 2002. His resume would actually take the whole half hour to cover, so I'll leave that to look up. He also renewed his vows to his beautiful wife of 38 years in 1998 on a beach in Kailua, Hawaii, which I was honored to be asked to officiate. He personifies the title of gentle warrior. Welcome, John. And I think we should show him a Minnesota handshake. This is called the Paul Bunyan handshake. He didn't know I was going to do this. We put our hands like this, and then you go like that, put thumb up, grab here. All right, Paul Bunyan handshake. All right. Okay, thanks, John. Okay, let's jump right in if you don't mind.
Sure.
What is game theory and how does it relate to our foreign policy and our military decisions?
Well, let me talk. Game theory started by John von Neumann, who was an absolutely brilliant mathematician. And frankly, he wanted to play poker better. But so he started thinking about how you think about problems where the interactions between different players, all trying to achieve their own aims, comes out, how to think about that, how to study it, and how to anticipate what the various players are going to do. And so when it comes to international relations, the first thing is trying to figure out who are the players for any subject that you're looking at. That is, who is going to have the greatest effects on the outcome, and then try to think through what types of courses of action they may take, what options you have, think about the intersections of those, and as you know, each does one, what that's likely to produce, and then of course it's never the end. You have to think of then what follows after that. So game theory is a very formal setup, and so you have to specify all of these. You have to specify who the players are, what their choices are, how they look. You know, if you pick course of action 1 and I pick course of action 2, what's the likely outcome? And then how will you value that? And how will I value that? And then you've got to do that for every player in every possible course of action. So you can see that in one sense it's simple, and a lot of the mathematics can be simple. There are 3 levels of game theory. What's called folklore, which gets into sort of your non-zero-sum, zero-sum types of stories.
Folklore?
Folklore.
Okay.
And then low church,
yeah.
And then high church. High church game theory the mathematics can get very complicated. But a lot of the things that the value comes in, and sort of working with toy problems and understanding if I've got a fairly simple problem and it can be that complicated, then what can I say about something when I throw in all the context and all the various pieces. So it helps you try to think about what's the essence of the problem you're working with. So game theory has not found a lot of direct application. There are several books. Stephen Brahms has written some that look at various international relations and suggest what the game looked like when people were trying to think through how they would proceed. But it's rarely used formally.
What do you mean by formally, John?
I mean, people actually laying out the structure of a game, and you know.
Because I saw you once do rock, paper, scissors in one of your papers,
Yes,
and
and
the
so
permutations of that were actually quite involved.
That's the problem, is
Right.
that and one thing about game theory, there two players you can represent nicely on a sheet of paper.
Right.
For three players, now you need a cube to represent what's called a game in strategic form to lay out all the dimensions. You go more than three, now we're dealing in higher dimensions of space, and in practicality, once you get above about 5 players, the computations can really stress
They're too unwieldy.
master computers,
Yeah.
right?
So-
And so that's why the art of trying to apply game theory is in trying to get it down to simpler cases, and mostly looking at two-player types of situations for bargaining, or for areas where game theory has received a lot of application is in auctions and bargaining situations. And that's where actually we mentioned Nash Solutions. That's what he came up with, notions of Nash equilibrium and a Nash bargaining solution.
Yeah, I read
sort of
that about
core-
Nash
Core
equilibrium.
solutions, right.
Well, one thing, you know, we chatted when we were walking on the beach at one point, you said that actually we've used game theory in pretty complex situations. For one thing, it's been a background of some of our diplomacy in Europe for quite some time, you said.
Well, I think as I recall, what I was getting at was security communities, and here we get into sort of zero-sum and non-zero-sum.
Describe that, zero-sum.
A zero-sum game just means whatever I win, you lose. So when you take it,
-4 plus 4.
-4 plus 4,
Mm-hmm.
and so it just comes out to 0. Now,
Right.
in life, there's almost no situation
Where there's zero-sum.
where it's zero-sum, because there's so many dimensions of the problem where you,
Okay.
so there's always room to bargain. To get to your comment about diplomacy, you wouldn't have any agreements if they're
Just zero-sum.
if it was zero-sum.
You
wouldn't
lose,
have-
you lose, you
right.
lose, I win.
And in economics,
Yeah.
I mean, the bargaining solution
isn't
had to do
gonna
with if there weren't a price I were willing to buy for and a price you were willing to sell for, we wouldn't agree. So it's not zero-sum, it's just, we got a range where, there's a range of prices I'm willing to pay and a range of prices you're willing to sell, and we work in there and come out to an agreement. So we're both winning.
But there is that in there, that there's some calculation of both motivation and win-win. I mean, even when we came in, the gentleman we were chatting with on the way in, there has to be some understanding of motivation, or what is really behind this guy's game, you could say.
Right. Right.
What's the motivation of what makes this guy tick?
This is one of the key challenges in working game theory is, I'll go a little, since this is a technical show, I'll go a little formal, but homo economicus, the idea is you maximize your gain, personal gain, and that's typically put in monetary terms is the way we think about it. So unfortunately, people equate rationality to, how does this person gain? Well, when you go into people like Kim Jong-un, or discussing on the way in, or talk about suicide bombers, what's the gain? Well, now you need to go from this notion of homo economicus, of it's all economic good, to deontic logic, where it has more to do with duty and rules and traditions and sustaining your traditions and performing your duties. And that's where the value lies. So for a suicide bomber, there is, it's a cultural expectation and a duty to perform, and then there is an expectation reward in the hereafter. So sometimes when people say that the theories don't apply anymore, it's just we're trying to push this rational framework into this economic
model.
Cage it in terms of economic gain, and it doesn't fit. But it works very well when you just say, what are the core values of that person?
So then do you put a numerical value on this?
Unfortunately, to do fancy game theory, you've got to quantify it, and this is where it becomes very challenging.
I would think.
And that's where you start to get a high church. Yeah, you get
stays up and have cigars and drinks.
Now we also talked about gaming. Now, when things get too complex, and you're not sure that you have considered all the right things, the easiest thing to do is to bring in real human players. And so rather than, a couple of guys sitting around and saying, okay, here's what they're likely to, here are the courses of action they're likely to think about, and here's how they're likely to, see the value of certain outcomes. You bring in role players, and you say, and you try to get the best subject matter experts, and have them actually play through the situation.
So you do these mock games.
So you do, right. So there's simulations of the situation you want to look at. And so war games, or more generally, operational games, because you can do them if you're trying to do city planning. You can bring all the different players together, and they have all their own interests, and you can run through a game of, okay, if we, try to do it this way, how's everybody likely to come out, et cetera. And so for operational gaming, it can be a very powerful tool. And I like Gertz and Duke wrote this book. I like their statement best, that gaming is a powerful methodology for mastering complexity, stimulating creativity, enhancing communication, and driving consensus that leads to action, to agreed action. And so that's what you hope out of a good game. So if you do a game, well-done games give those participants a real experience. And Tom Schelling used to say, that if somebody was going to Finland to be the ambassador, they'd learn more from a 3-day game than any, course you could give them and reading and whatnot.
So you would do a mock game in that kind of situation about the different kind of potential problems they would be facing?
Yes. Well, it started out, gaming started out, actually the Prussians in the early 19th century.
Right, this goes way back to
Yeah, it goes back. They had Napoleon to deal with, you see. And so it came to this problem of how you defeat absolute genius. And you've got to get your own guys sort of on the same page and thinking through problems and preparing for what they're going to face. And so they started doing these tabletop sand table games.
Right. You see in movies every once in a while.
So they would do games. And that became, when the Prussians won the wars in the mid-19th century, the Franco-Prussian War and Austro-Prussian Wars, their military, everybody said, what are they doing to
figure this out?
Be this, that they're this good.
And the truth is they're rehearsing in that sense.
And then the major militaries around the world started doing war gaming, and the United States picked it up. They started establishing their war colleges, and Army War College and the Navy War College, and the Japanese and the English and the Brits and whatnot, all set there. So before World War II, gaming was a principal way, excuse me, that people thought through problems, tried to figure out what are the governing factors in they're going to drive this situation I'm dealing with. Which of those can I control, and how do I mitigate the ones I can't control, and deal with that. So
and this is still being done, obviously.
yes, and actually with computer simulations, it fell, a lot of decisions started to go to being made more by computer campaign simulations.
But John, I'm just thinking the
recently,
motivation still is somewhat almost Sun Tzu's quote, that you're doing this so you don't have to fight the war.
Absolutely. I
mean, that's
I think
pretty point needing to be underlined.
My belief when I was here in Hawaii was the 20th century mostly showed the challenges of actually using military power. Military power is always more fearsome in a prospect than in actual usage.
Yeah, I was thinking of Eisenhower's quote, says
And
that
so,
I hate war the only way
Yeah.
a warrior can hate war.
Right.
Looking to energize your Friday afternoon? Tune in to Stan the Energy Man at 12 noon. Aloha Friday here on ThinkTech Hawaii.
My name is Mark Shklov, and I'm the host of Law Across the Sea. And Law Across the Sea is a program that brings attorneys who have traveled across the sea and live in Hawaii or are staying in Hawaii for a time to talk about their travels, where they're from, where they're going, and bring it all together, because really we're all connected some way, although we travel across the sea. So I hope that you'll tune in and watch our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching ThinkTech. I'm Grace Chang, the new host for Global Connections. You can find me here live every Thursday at 1 p.m., where we'll be talking to people around the islands or visiting the islands who are connected in various aspects of global affairs. So please tune in, and aloha, and thanks for watching.
John, I want to get a little bit more closer to the bone here. It's kind of interesting. What motivates you? What's the motivation for, I mean, you've had a spectacular career. It just reads like an amazing life.
Well,
let alone the personal part, which we haven't brought up. But what was the motivation? What's motivating you?
I've always wanted to contribute, and early on I read a lot of history and sort of got into this national security thinking, and read Thomas Schelling when I was young, and I'd read Little Hart on strategies of the indirect approach, and a lot of military stuff. But when I was young, I wanted to be a Navy aviator and an astronaut. But once we got to the moon, 1969, the astronaut program did not offer a career path. We essentially shut it down. So ended up going into nuclear submarines instead. So the rather than becoming an astronaut, but it's wanting to promote security and peaceful development. I think that's had the greatest opportunity when I was here
in Hawaii,
working as a special assistant to Admiral Blair, where we started talking about what we wanted for the region were dependable expectations of peaceful change. And then I wrote up some remarks for him, and he gave him some Council on Foreign Relations event, and he says, "You sound like Karl Deutsch." And I said, "Oh, who's Karl Deutsch?" Anyway, and he
I would say that too.
Yeah, and early, it turns out in the 1950s, Karl Deutsch came up with this notion of security communities that was the foundation really for what has become the European community. So it started out, there were things on the European coal, getting together around that, but getting France and Germany together and England in and NATO to keep the U.S. in. And, you know, it was the old thing to keep the Germans down, the Soviets out, and the U.S. in. And
I'm going to undermine that, though, because first of all, you've given me permission to interrupt
Yes.
without considering it rude, because I want to go back to that motivation that you wanted to help the world in some sense.
Yes.
I mean, this was the avenue. I mean, it could sound like a contradiction. You did theories on how wars not to be fought, how you can make sense to people how not to fight these wars. It doesn't make sense to fight these wars. There's a lot of it seems your work.
Well, yes. I mean, I do believe that deterrence, done right, is a real smart. It's not free, but it's really important. And I worked when Admiral James D. Watkins was the Chief of Naval Operations. He was a devout Catholic, and
you've spoken of him before.
Yeah, he felt very strongly that he had to come up with deterrence. So actually, he was a strong voice behind the Strategic Defense Initiative, but also some other things that led to. And as you recall, President Reagan met with Gorbachev, and they decided that nuclear weapons were a big challenge to both, and that started the really our path to the nuclear arms reductions. And so, yeah, I mean, working in national security, I've always thought the best thing I could do is work myself out of a job. And so, if we didn't need it, but unfortunately, there are people out there who are willing to use force and coercion to achieve their aims. They still think that it's feasible. We created the United Nations to try and get collective responses against those.
Right.
And the United States alliances are still the greatest advantage the United States has over any possible challenger to the world order. And
and that again is some sense of game theory of knowing how to
leverage
your intent.
It's that type of game theory helps contribute to strategic thinking, because you're thinking through how is the other side approaching the problem, how might you approach the problem, and how it comes out. So that structure of game theory really is the foundations for thinking through sound strategy and developing sound strategy.
I'm going to return to or go back to something in terms of just the players involved and the clarity of mind that you bring to this. One of the reasons, this is a bit of a Lucky Live Hawaii part of it. I know that you have a ritual when you're in Hawaii you've actually got a meditation rock down on Lanikai Beach that you use to clear your mind.
Right, I think it's Alala Point, is that? Right. Yeah.
So, and last year I got to actually teach meditation to the Marines at Kaneohe Marine Base. So I guess what I'm saying is, how do you think meditation in terms of assisting presence of mind and presence and open heart contributes to game theory and to national security, you could even say?
I think
the clarity of mind.
Yeah, it comes in on the value side when you're trying to think of, what is valuable. But I think meditation, as I said, clears your mind. When things happen, it helps you be able to not react, but to think and respond and realize you have a choice of your response to everything.
The millisecond that changes the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you don't react and you just think, and if some driver's cutting you off, you can think, wow, maybe maybe they've really got to get someplace, or they're in a hurry, or they're just having a bad day. But I don't need to behave. It doesn't need to change my behavior. I can run my own race. I don't need to, be stimulated by,
So it gives you a basis to run the game better. You don't have to get caught up into a reactionary game.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it's just for, part of living and trying to get that calmness and that presence, I think is, meditation is hugely
Do you see
valuable.
that in fellows that you work with?
Yeah, it's still, I think,
Fellows and women?
relatively new.
Yeah.
I think, interestingly, the PTSD problems.
Yes, yeah, that's where I
have-
got brought in.
Right.
Mhm.
Have, it was originally thought to be a little, suspicious, and then when they
right.
actually, one good thing about the military is they look at the data a lot.
Right.
And, they may be a leading edge eventually on this, the same way that they were a leading edge in desegregation of the
Well,
country.
I've been saying that the military has led the way socially for so many things.
When they decide to do it, I mean, and
I know it's a
when-
cumbersome project. But
Well, that really, it's funny. I love my Marine friends, and I'll
we
have
got
to
1
say,
minute, John.
General Mattis,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
is one
yeah.
of these guys that, I mean, will look at it, think
Through it.
through it, and then, if it has promise, he'll pursue it, type of thing. So, so I think there are many things
Of
that,
where these
where
words used.
that are a little bit on the edge. They've been more Eastern religion, and people in Western religious traditions are a little skeptical. But as it's shown to actually provide value, we tend to be a pretty practical people as Americans.
Which is wonderful. Is there anything you wanted to add right at the end? Is there any?
Oh, just
Hello, Zoe. Hello, Jack. Hello.
well, a little bit of that. My daughter recently started the Oneness Initiative with a friend of hers, and it's growing gangbusters, and it is to promote this consciousness and help everyone realize that we're all one, that we look for around the world, we see more commonality than
Beautiful, John. Beautiful.
and if religion's concentrated on the commonality rather than distinctions between them, there wouldn't be a lot to fight about over religions. But
Beautiful.
and then also it's oneness with nature. I mean, every recognized consciousness goes beyond humans. So onenessinitiative.org, and then also to put a little more energy into the center of our politics, let me shout out for this
NoLabels.com.
NoLabels.org.
Okay.
Just those two things I
We're
wanted
gonna
to put
leave
a
here.
marker down. Thank you.